Philippine prehistory covers the events prior to the written history of what would become the Philippine archipelago. The current demarcation line between this period and the early history of the Philippines is 900 AD, which is the date of the first surviving written record to come from the Philippines, the Laguna Copperplate Inscription. This period saw the immense change that took hold of the archipelago from Stone Age cultures in the 4th century, continuing on with the gradual widening of trade until 900 and the first surviving written records. Stone Age. The first evidence of the systematic use of Stone Age technologies in the Philippines is estimated to have dated back to about 50,000 BC, and this phase in the development of Proto-Philippine societies is considered to end with the rise of metal tools in about 500 BC, although stone tools continued to be used past that date. Filipino anthropologist F. Lando Chicano refers to the earliest noticeable stage in the development of Proto-Philippine societies as the Formative Phase. He also identified stone tool and ceramics making as the two core industries that defined the economic activity of the time, and which shaped the means by which early Filipinos adapted to their environment during this period. About 30,000 BC, the Negritos, who became the ancestors of today's Utahs, or Aboriginal Filipinos, probably lived in the Philippines. No evidence has survived which would indicate details of ancient Filipino life such as their crops, color, and architecture. Philippine historian William Henry Scott points out any theory which describes such details is therefore a pure hypothesis and should be honestly presented as such. Calo Man. The earliest human remains known in the Philippines are the fossilized remains discovered in 2007 by Armand Salvador Maez in Calo Cave, Cagayan, Philippines. The find was of 67,000-year-old remains that predate Tabon Man. Specifically, the find consisted of a single 61mm metatarsal which, when dated using uranium series ablation, was found to be at least about 67,000 years old. If definitively proven to be remains of Homo sapiens, it would antedate the 47,000-year-old remains of Tabon Man to become the earliest human remains known in the Philippines, and one of the oldest human remains in the Asia-Pacific. Tabon Man. Fossilized fragments of a skull and jawbone of 3 individuals had been discovered on May 28, 1962 by Dr. Robert B. Fox, an American anthropologist of the National Museum. These fragments are collectively called Tabon Man after the place where they were found on the west coast of Palawan. Tabon Cave appears to be a kind of Stone Age factory, with both finished stone flake tools and waste core flakes having been found at 4 separate levels in the main chamber. Charcoal left from 3 assemblages of cooking fires. There has been carbon-14 dated to roughly 7,000, 20,000, and 22,000 BC. Tabon Cave is named after the tabon bird, which deposited thick hard layers of guano during periods when the cave was uninhabited so that succeeding groups of tool makers settled on a cement-like floor of bird dung. That the inhabitants were actually engaged in tool manufacture is indicated that about half of the 3,000 recovered specimens examined are discarded cores of a material which had to be transported from some distance. The Tabon Man fossils are considered to have come from a third group of inhabitants, who worked the cave between 22,000 and 20,000 BC. An earlier cave level lies so far below the level containing cooking fire assemblages that it must represent Upper Pleistocene dates like 45 or 50,000 years ago. Physical anthropologists who have examined the Tabon Man skullcap have agreed that it belonged to modern man, Homo sapiens, as distinguished from the mid-Pleistocene Homo erectus species. This indicates that Tabon Man was pre-Mongoloid. 2 experts have given the opinion that the mandible is Australian in physical type, and that the skullcap measurements are most nearly like the Ainus or Tasmanians. Nothing can be concluded about Tabon Man's physical appearance from the recovered skull fragments except that he was not a Negrito. The custom of jar burial, which ranges from Sri Lanka, to the plain of jars, in Laos, to Japan, also was practiced in the Tabon Caves. A spectacular example of a secondary burial jar is owned by the National Museum, a national treasure, with a jar lid topped with 2 figures, one the deceased, arms crossed, hands touching the shoulders, the other a steersman, both seated in a prow, with only the mast missing from the piece. Secondary burial was practiced across all the islands of the Philippines during this period, with the bones reburied, some in the burial jars. 78 earthenware vessels were recovered from the Mananggul Cave, Palawan, specifically for burial. Migration theories. There have been several models of early human migration to the Philippines. Since H. Otley Bear first proposed his wave migration theory, numerous scholars have approached the question of how, when and why humans first came to the Philippines. The question of whether the first humans arrived from the south or from the north has been a subject of heated debate for decades. As new discoveries come to light, past hypotheses are re-evaluated and new theories constructed. Bear's wave migration theory, the first, and most widely known theory of the prehistoric peopling of the Philippines, is that of H. Otley Bear, founder of the Anthropology Department of the University of the Philippines. According to Dr. Bear, the ancestors of the Filipinos came to the islands first via land bridges which would occur during times when the sea level was low, and then later in sea-going vessels such as the Balangay. Thus he differentiated these ancestors as arriving in different waves of migration, as follows. Dawn Man, a caveman type who was similar to Java Man, Peking Man, and other Asian Homo erectus of 250,000 years ago. The Aboriginal Pygmy group, the Negritos, who arrived between 25,000 and 30,000 years ago. The seafaring tool-using Indonesian group who arrived about 5,000 to 6,000 years ago and were the first immigrants to reach the Philippines by sea. The seafaring, more civilized Malays who brought the Iron Age culture and were the real colonizers and dominant cultural group in the pre-Hispanic Philippines. Bear's theory, while still popular among lay Filipinos, has generally been disputed by anthropologists and historians. Reasons for doubting it are founded on Bear's use of 19th-century scientific methods of progressive evolution and migratory diffusion as the basis for his hypothesis. These methods have since been proven to be too simple and unreliable to explain the prehistoric peopling of the Philippines. Objections to the land bridges theory. In February 1976, Friedrich Voss, a German scientist who studied the geology of the Philippines, questioned the validity of the theory of land bridges. He maintained that the Philippines was never part of mainland Asia. He claimed that it arose from the bottom of the sea and, as the thin Pacific crust moved below it, continued to rise. It continues to rise today. The country lies along great earth faults that extend to deep submarine trenches. The resulting violent earthquakes caused what is now the land masses forming the Philippines to rise to the surface of the sea. Dr. Voss also pointed out that when scientific studies were done on the Earth's crust from 1964 to 1967, it was discovered that the 35-kilometer thick crust underneath China does not reach the Philippines. Thus, the latter could not have been a land bridge to the Asian mainland. The matter of who the first settlers were has not been really resolved. This is being disputed by anthropologists, as well as Professor H. Otley Bear, who claims that the first inhabitants of the Philippines come from the Malay Peninsula. The Malays now constitute the largest portion of the populace and what Filipinos now have is an Austronesian culture. Philippine historian William Henry Scott has pointed out that Palawan and the Calamianes Islands are separated from Borneo by water nowhere deeper than 100 meters, that south of a line drawn between Saigon and Brunei does the depth of the South China Sea nowhere exceeds 100 meters, and that the Strait of Malacca reaches 50 meters only at one point. Scott also asserts that the Sulu archipelago is not the peak of a submerged mountain range connecting Mindanao and Borneo, but the exposed edge of three small ridges produced by tectonic tilting of the sea bottom in recent geologic times. According to Scott, it is clear that Palawan and the Calamianes do not stand on a submerged land bridge, but were once a horn-like protuberance on the shoulder of a continent whose southern shoreline used to be the present islands of Java and Borneo. Mindoro and the Calamianes are separated by a channel more than 500 meters deep. Bellwoods' Austronesian diffusion theory. The popular contemporary alternative to Bear's model is Peter Bellwood a unregistered trademark S out of Taiwan hypothesis, which is based largely on linguistics, hewing very close to Robert Bluster unregistered trademark S model of the history of the Austronesian language family, and supplementing it with archaeological data. This model suggests that between 4500 BC and 4000 BC, Developments in agricultural technology in the Yunnan Plateau in China created pressures which drove certain peoples to migrate to Taiwan. These people either already had or began to develop a unique language of their own, now referred to as Proto-Austronesian. By around 3000 BC, these groups started differentiating into 3 or 4 distinct subcultures, and by 2500 to 1500 BC, one of these groups began migrating southwards towards the Philippines and Indonesia, reaching as far as Borneo and the Moluccas by 1500 BC, forming new cultural groupings and developing unique languages. By 1500 BC, some of these groups started migrating west, reaching as far as Madagascar around the first millennium. Others migrated east, settling as far as Easter Island by the mid-13th century, giving the Austronesian language group the distinction of being the most widely distributed language groups in the world at the time, in terms of the geographical span of the homelands of its languages. According to this theory, the peoples of the Philippines are the descendants of those cultures who remained on the Philippine Islands when others moved first southwards, then eastward and westward. Solheim's New Maritime Trading and Communication Network or Island Origin Theory, Wilhelm Solheim's concept of the New Maritime Trading and Communication Network, while not strictly a theory regarding the biological ancestors of modern Southeast Asians, does suggest that the patterns of cultural diffusion throughout the Asia-Pacific region are not what would be expected if such cultures were to be explained by simple migration. Where Bellwood based his analysis primarily on linguistic analysis, Solheim's approach was based on artifact findings. On the basis of a careful analysis of artifacts, he suggests the existence of a trade and communication network that first spread in the Asia-Pacific region during its Neolithic age. According to Solheim's NMTCN theory, this trade network, consisting of both Austronesian and non-Austronesian seafaring peoples, was responsible for the spread of cultural patterns throughout the Asia-Pacific region, not the simple migration proposed by the out-of-Taiwan hypothesis. Solheim 2006, Solheim came up with 4 geographical divisions delineating the spread of the NMTCN over time, calling these geographical divisions lobes. Specifically, these were the central, northern, eastern and western lobes. The central lobe was further divided into 2 smaller lobes reflecting phases of cultural spread, the early central lobe and the late central lobe. Instead of Austronesian peoples originating from Taiwan, Solheim placed the origins of the early NMTCN peoples in the early central lobe, which was in eastern coastal Vietnam, at around 9000 BC. He then suggests the spread of peoples around 5000 BC towards the late central lobe, including the Philippines, via island Southeast Asia, rather than from the north as the Taiwan theory suggests. Thus, from the point of view of the Philippine peoples, the NMTCN is also referred to as the island origin theory. This late central lobe included southern China and Taiwan, which became the area where Austronesian became the original language family and Malayo-Polynesian developed. In about 4000 to 3000 BC, these peoples continued spreading east through northern Luzon to Micronesia to form the early eastern lobe, carrying the Malayo-Polynesian languages with them. These languages would become part of the culture spread by the NMTCN in its expansions Malaysia and western towards Malaysia before 2000 BC, continuing along coastal India and Sri Lanka up to the western coast of Africa and Madagascar. And over time, further eastward towards its easternmost borders at Easter Island. Thus, as in the case of Bellwood's theory, the Austronesian languages spread eastward and westward from the area around the Philippines. Aside from the matter of the origination of peoples, the difference between the 2 theories is that Bellwood's theory suggests a linear expansion, while Solheim's suggests something more akin to concentric circles, all overlapping in the geographical area of the late central lobe which includes the Philippines. Chicanos' local origins theory. Another alternative model is that asserted by anthropologist F. Lander Chicano of the University of the Philippines, who in 2001 contended that the existing fossil evidence of ancient humans demonstrates that they not only migrated to the Philippines, but also to New Guinea, Borneo, and Australia. In reference to Behr's wave model, he points out that there is no definitive way to determine the race of the human fossils. The only certain thing is that the discovery of Tavern Man proves that the Philippines was inhabited as early as 21,000 or 22,000 years ago. If this is true, the first inhabitants of the Philippines would not have come from the Malay Peninsula. Instead, Chicano postulates that the present Filipinos are products of the long process of evolution and movement of people. He also adds that this is also true of Indonesians and Malaysians, with none among the three peoples being the dominant carrier of culture. In fact, he suggests that the ancient humans who populated Southeast Asia cannot be categorized under any of these three groups. He thus further suggests that it is not correct to consider Filipino culture as being Malayan in orientation. Genetic Studies, 2001 Stanford University study. A Stanford University study conducted during 2001 revealed that haplogroup O3M122 is the most common Y chromosome DNA haplogroup found among Filipinos. This particular haplogroup is also predominant among Chinese, Koreans, and Vietnamese. Another haplogroup, haplogroup O1AM119, is also found among Filipinos. The rates of haplogroup O1A are highest among the Taiwanese Aborigines, and Chamic-speaking people. Genetic data found among a sampling of Filipinos may indicate some relation to the Ami tribe of Taiwan. 2008 Leeds University study. A 2008 genetic study showed no evidence of a large-scale Taiwanese migration into the Philippine Islands. A study by Leeds University and published in Molecular Biology and Evolution, showed that mitochondrial DNA lineages have been evolving within island Southeast Asia since modern humans arrived approximately 50,000 years ago. Population dispersals occurred at the same time as sea levels rose, which resulted in migrations from the Philippine Islands into Taiwan within the last 10,000 years. A 2002 China Medical University study indicated that some Filipinos shared genetic chromosome that is found among Asian people, such as Taiwanese Aborigines, Indonesians, Thais, and Chinese. A variety of research study by the University of the Philippines, genetic chromosome were found in Filipinos which are shared by people from different parts of East Asia and Southeast Asia. The predominant genotype detected was SC, the Southeast Asian genotype. However, only about 50 urine samples were collected for the study, far below the minimum sample size needed to account for credible test results. These indigenous elements in the Filipinos' genetic makeup serve as clues to the patterns of migration throughout Philippine prehistory. After the 16th century, of course, the colonial period saw the influx of genetic influence from Europeans. During the above-mentioned study conducted by Stanford University Asia-Pacific Research Center, it was stated that 3.6% of the Philippine population has varying degrees of European ancestry from Spanish and American colonization. However, only 28 individuals from the Philippines were genotyped for this study, again a sample size far below the minimum sample size needed to account for credible test results in a population of over 90 million individuals. Proto-Austronesians, before the expansion out of Taiwan, recent archaeological, linguistic and genetic evidence has linked Austronesian speakers in insular Southeast Asia to cultures such as the Hmud and Dapankang in Neolithic China. 5000–2000 BC a Euro-Austronesian speakers arrive. Historian William Henry Scott has observed that, based on lexicostatistical analysis involving 7 million word pairs, linguist Isidore Dion offered in 1962 two alternative scenarios explaining the origin and spread of Austronesian languages, that they originated in some Pacific island and spread westward to Asia, or that they originated in Taiwan and spread southward. Based on subsequent study of the second alternative, Scott concludes that the Philippine language tree could have been introduced by Austronesian speakers as long ago as 5000 BC, probably from the north, with their descendants expanding throughout the Philippine archipelago and beyond in succeeding millennia, absorbing or replacing sparse populations already present, and their language diversifying into dozens of mutually unintelligible languages which replaced earlier ones. During those millennia, other Austronesian speakers entered the Philippines in large enough numbers to leave a linguistic mark but not to replace established languages. Scott suggested that if this scenario is correct, all present Philippine languages were produced within the archipelago, none of them being introduced by separate migration, and all of them having more in common with each other than with languages outside of the Philippines. Early Metal Age. The earliest metal tools in the Philippines were said to have first been used somewhere around 500 BC, and this new technology coincided with considerable changes in the lifestyle of early Filipinos. The new tools brought about a more stable way of life, and created more opportunities for communities to grow, both in terms of size and cultural development. Where communities once consisted of small bands of kinsmen living in campsites, larger villages came about, usually based near water, which made traveling and trading easier. The resulting ease of contact between communities meant that they began to share similar cultural traits, something which had not previously been possible when the communities consisted only of small kinship groups. Chicano refers to the period between 500 BC and 1 AD as the incipient phase, which for the first time in the artifact record, sees the presence of artifacts that are similar in design from site to site throughout the archipelago. Along with the use of metal tools, this era also saw significant improvement in pottery technology. 100 BC onward, Iron Age finds in Philippines also point to the existence of trade between Tamil Nadu and the Philippine Islands during the 9th and 10th centuries BC. The Philippines is believed by some historians to be the island of Chryse, the Golden One, which is the name given by ancient Greek writers in reference to an island rich in gold east of India. Pomponius Mela, Marinos of Tyre and the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea mentioned this island in 100 BC, and it is basically the equivalent of the India Suvarnadvipa, the island of gold. Josephus calls it in Latin Aurea, and equates the island with biblical Ophir, from where the ships of Tyre and Solomon brought back gold and other trade items. The Visayan Islands, particularly Cebu, had earlier encounter with the Greek traders in 21 AD. Ptolemy locates the islands of Chryse east of the Cruces Curse Nansen, the Golden Peninsula, that is the Malaya Peninsula. North of Chryse in the Periplus was Thin, which some consider the first European reference to China. Scholars however know that Thin or Jin as in Jinchu, Suvarnadvipa originates from Chinese word for gold. Jin Chinese have traded with and settled in Philippines thousands of years before West even knew of this area. In about the 200 BC, there arose a practice of using gold eye covers, and then, gold facial orifice covers to adorn the dead, resulting in an increase of ancient gold finds. During the Qin dynasty and the Tang dynasty, China was well aware of the golden lands far to the south. The Buddhist pilgrim I Tsing mentions Chin Chu, Isle of Gold in the archipelago south of China on his way back from India. Medieval Muslims refer to the islands as the kingdoms of Zabag and Wakwak as rich in gold, referring to the eastern islands of the Malay archipelago, the location of present-day Philippines and eastern Indonesia. Thalassocracies and international trade. The emergence of barangay city-states and trade. Since at least the 3rd century, the indigenous peoples were in contact with other Southeast Asian and East Asian nations. Fragmented ethnic groups established numerous city-states formed by the assimilation of several small political units known as barangay, each headed by a duchy or headman and answerable to a king, titled Raja. Even scattered barangays, through the development of inter-island and international trade, became more culturally homogeneous by the 4th century. Hindu-Buddhist culture and religion flourished among the noblemen in this era. Many of the barangay were, to varying extents, under the de jure jurisprudence of one of several neighboring empires, among them the Malay Srivijaya, Javanese Majapahit, Brunei, Melaka empires, although de facto had established their own independent system of rule. Trading links with Sumatra, Borneo, Thailand, Java, China, India, Arabia, Japan and the Ryukyu Kingdom flourished during this era. A thalassocracy had thus emerged based on international trade. Each barangay consisted of about 100 families. Some barangays were big, such as Zubu, Butuan, Mactan, Mandani, Lalan, Irong, Bigan, and Slerong. Each of these big barangays had a population of more than 2,000. In the earliest times, the items which were prized by the peoples included jars, which were a symbol of wealth throughout South Asia, and later metal, salt and tobacco. In exchange, the peoples would trade feathers, rhino horn, hornbill beaks, beeswax, birds' nests, resin, ratandu. In the period between the 7th century to the beginning of the 15th century, numerous prosperous centers of trade had emerged, including the Kingdom of Namayan, which flourished alongside Manila Bay, Cebu, Iloilo, Butuan, the Kingdom of Sanfitsi situated in Pangasinan, the kingdoms of Sabag and Wak-Wak situated in Pampanga and Aparay. Introduction of metal. The introduction of metal into the Philippines and the resulting changes did not follow the typical pattern. Robert Fox notes, there is, for example, no real evidence of a Bronze Age, or Copper-Bronze Age in the archipelago, a development which occurred in many areas of the world. The transition, as shown by recent excavation, was from stone tools to iron tools. The earliest use of metal in the Philippines was the use of copper for ornamentation, not tools. Even when copper and bronze tools became common, they were often used side by side with stone tools. Metal only became the dominant material for tools late in this era, leading to a new phase in cultural development. Bronze tools from the Philippines' early Metal Age have been encountered in various sites, but they were not widespread. This has been attributed to the lack of a local source of tin, which when combined with copper produces bronze. This lack has led most anthropologists to conclude that bronze items were imported and that those bronze smelting sites which have been found in the Philippines, in Palawan, were for re-smelting and remolding. Introduction of iron. Iron Age finds in Philippines also point to the existence of trade between Tamil Nadu and the Philippine Islands during the 9th and 10th centuries BC. When iron was introduced to the Philippines, it became the preferred material for tools and largely ended the use of stone tools. Whether the iron was imported or mined locally is still debated by scholars. Baer thought that it was mined locally, but others point to the lack of iron smelting artifacts and conclude that the iron tools were probably imported. Metalsmiths from this era had already developed a crude version of modern metallurgical processes, notably the hardening of soft iron through carburization. Archaeological sources. Until very recently, Philippine historians and anthropologists have been limited to the rare artifact discovered since the 19th century. During the Spanish colonial era, which began in 1521, many artifacts were destroyed or reused. A good example is the Spanish walled city of Intramuros in Manila, whose stone bricks were taken from the original city wall of pre-Hispanic Manila. As new evidence is discovered, old theories are adapted or new ones developed, which has led to numerous and sometimes conflicting theories about the prehistory of the Philippines. In short, the lack of artifacts and other evidence has led to a lack of consensus among prehistory historians. See also, Cultural Achievements of Pre-Colonial Philippines, History of the Barangay before Hispanization, History of the Philippines before colonization, Prehistoric Asia, Notes. References, Bellwood, Peter, Prehistory of the Indo-Malaysian Archipelago, Honolulu, Hawaii, University of Hawaii Unregistered trademark iPressa. Dizon, Eusebio, The Metal Age in the Philippines, An Archaeometallurgical Investigation, Manila, National Museum of the Filipino Phioply. Fox, Robert Bradford, Archaeology and the Philippines, SOG Langana. Chicano, F. Lander, Filipino Prehistory, Rediscovering Precolonial Heritage, Quezon City, Punlad Research House, Incorporated, ISBN A971-622-006-5A. Scott, William Henry, Pre-Hispanic Source Materials for the Study of Philippine History, New Day Publishers, ISBN A971-10-0226-4, retrieved August 5, 2008 A. Solheim, Wilhelm G., 2, Archaeology and Culture in Southeast Asia, Unraveling the Newsentai, Diliman, Quezon City, University of the Philippines Press, PA 316, ISBN A971-542-508-9A. Zaid, Sonia M., The Philippines, A Unique Nation, All Nations Publishing, ISBN A971-642-071-4. Further reading, Chicano, F. Lander, Philippine Prehistory, An Anthropological Overview of the Beginnings of Filipino Society and Culture, Philippine Center for Advanced Studies, University of the Philippines Sistema, Regalado, Felix B. Franco, Quintin B. Grimo, Eliza B., ed., History of Fanao, Central Philippine Universitia, Scott, William Henry, Barangay, 16th Century Philippine Culture and Society, Quezon City, Ateneo de Manila University Press, ISBN A971-550-135-4A. Scott, William Henry, Looking for the Pre-Hispanic Filipino, Quezon City, New Day Publishers, ISBN A971-10-0524-7A. External links: The Timeline of the History of the Philippines.